Another new tariff turnaround from President Trump, announcing on Sunday he will delay his plan to levy a sweeping 50% tariff on the European Union just days after declaring them because, he said, trade talks were going nowhere. Henrietta Treyz is the managing partner and director of economic policy research at Veda Partners. With me in studio is NBC's business and data correspondent Brian Chung. We are talking, Brian, about the largest trade relationship in the world. What would it mean to everyday Americans if there was a 50% tariff?
Yeah, well, it would mean 50% potentially in higher costs for consumers when it comes to things like wine and cheeses that come from Europe. But I want to point out that even though there's I was going to say that's something that hits a lot of Americans home. But I do want to point out that those are not the major exports from the countries in the EU by at least the sheer dollar volume. Think about things like, for example, airplanes as well as motor vehicles. We import a lot of medicinal and pharmaceutical products as well from the European Union in magnitudes larger than just French wine and cheese. So those things could all get more expensive. Now, of course, the announcement over the weekend that that won't happen as early as next month, that it could happen in July, does certainly alleviate some of those concerns. But I think what makes all of this complicated, Chris, is that unlike other countries where they can negotiate bilaterally, this is a block of countries. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Union, is going to have to figure out whether or not among the dozens or so countries in the European Union, whether or not a trade deal is able to get across the finish line. So it's a very complicated economic relationship, but it's also a very complicated negotiation that's going to happen between the U.S. and the EU.
Well, let's talk about that with NBC's Kelly O'Donnell, who's at the White House. Do we even know where these trade talks between the White House and EU stand right now, Kelly?
In the specifics, no, we don't. But we know that the president has been speaking out and forceful about his concerns that he wants to see negotiations proceed. And at the same time, also having some flexibility, as he likes to describe it, after talking about tariffs, imposing tariffs, ratcheting up the pressure, then being willing to pull back the pressure by delaying that 50% tariff on the EU until July, giving some breathing room for negotiations. And on this holiday, we have not heard from the departments that would be directly handling this, but probably in the days ahead, we will get more insight about how they're going about trying to have negotiations. But the president has made tariffs a central theme of his new administration, and he has long expressed and frequently expressed his frustration with the EU. And Brian laid it out about how you have different countries with different kinds of levels of interaction with the U.S. in terms of commerce. And it is, in fact, complicated. So broad brush strokes from President Trump on his social posts or in his responses to questions or in the ways that he likes to communicate about this are only one level of the conversation. It goes so much deeper and gets so much more complicated. And there's, of course, a lot on the line. And we have learned through this whole process there might be certain levels of tariffs where the pain is broadly dispersed, and then others where it's very acute in certain areas. And those tend to bubble up and get the president's attention and have these sort of conversations like the EU president talking to the president, trying to get some resolution. So I would expect there'd be more of that volatility in the approach as we go forward.
Thank you so much, Kelly. So, Henrietta, obviously, not the first time the president has announced a steep tariff on an ally and then walked it back. And by the way, we should say a top EU import for us is pharmaceuticals. And the president, Brian mentioned that, but the president has promised to bring down drug prices, among other things. What do you even say to regular Americans who are trying to navigate this uncertainty? You know, some of them rushed out and thought, I'm going to have to buy a car. And so we talk about the businesses a lot, but for everyday Americans who are trying to budget, what do they do?
You know, it's amazing. This is the most impressive part of the whole story, in my opinion, is that the American public is just incredibly aware that these tariffs that the president keeps putting on, has in place, is escalating month by month, are a direct tax on everything that they buy. And you can see that in their actions. You can see it in the front page advertisements on local newspapers. You can see it everywhere you go. And Walmart and other stores are letting their consumers, their shoppers know that prices are on the rise, and it's specifically because of President Trump and his trade policies. So whether that's ibuprofen or a can of beer on this Memorial Day, all that stuff is more expensive expressly because of President Trump's tariffs. And the American public is incredibly aware of that. And I think that's why you're seeing such negative reactions from Republicans, independents, and Democrats in every single poll about his trade war strategy. They don't believe it will work. It has not worked. We are now a month out from materially escalated tariffs that will not just raise prices for consumers, but take things off of our shelves. And that's already what's in place with China and what will precipitate for the next couple months or even years.
I mean, that's the question, right? A lot of Americans have been bracing for higher prices as companies say, look, we can't absorb the costs anymore, eat them, as the president likes to say. Is there, again, like with anything else, any real sense of when we might be seeing that, feeling it on Americans' personal bottom line?
Yes, it's already in place. I know when I go to the grocery store, I can already see it. You know, coffee, for example, is already $3 more expensive for every single bag that you buy. It's $17, $18. You know, that's not something that you would have seen without President Trump in office. So those escalating costs are really everywhere. You can see it in the day-to-day stuff that you're purchasing, and we'll see it even more as we start getting ready for summer camps or back to school purchases and things along those lines. The goods coming in from China are tariffed at an average rate of 51%. That's effectively cut off trade, and that's why cargo shipments are not going back to their pre-tariff rate levels. You cannot import goods and pass that much cost on to consumers. We will have much less optionality when we go to the stores, and everything will be more expensive.
Well, as the New York Times puts it, Henrietta, Trump's decision to escalate the trade wars on Friday, quote, capped off a week that saw Mr. Trump ignore repeated warnings that his agenda could worsen the nation's debt, harm many of his own voters, hurt the finances of low-income families, and contribute far less in growth than the White House contends. That is a sentence that should strike and would strike fear in the heart of almost any political analyst, for sure. But the Times obviously is referring to Trump's massive budget bill containing a lot of his domestic priorities, which is now in the hands of the Senate. Some of them don't like it. But how consequential is this moment for our economy when you consider huge piece of legislation and then Trump's trade war and the back and forth on that?
The biggest consequence is that these are compounding components, especially for low-income threshold individuals. So, for example, not only are the tariffs taxes, but the tax bill does not include new tax cuts. Almost $3.8 trillion of a $4 trillion bill is extending the status quo. So there are pieces of tax reduction in here for some small segments of the economy on overtime and tips and things along those lines. But for everyone else, you will be paying $3,200 more for everything that you buy this year. And there is not a commensurate tax cut in this package. Indeed, it is deficit increasing, which is why the bond markets and your stock portfolio are having a problem at the same time. And then to compound it even further, we're cutting Medicaid, food stamps, and the other programs that those low end of the spectrum income brackets rely on. And so while their costs of buying everyday items is increasing, we are also taking away federal aid. And that's going to make what we're expecting in terms of recessionary outlook, reduced or raised unemployment, and overall inflation continue for the remainder of this year. And the tariffs haven't really even fully been baked in yet. There are more tariffs to come on pharmaceuticals, on the EU, and more than 100 other nations, according to his Liberation Day plan.
Since Trump's trade wars started, my wallet has been crying when I go to the market. This deal maker says he will impose a 50% tariff on the EU in a week and then says, actually, I'm postponing it until July. So much for indecision. Medicines, cars, even cheese and wine from Europe will get more expensive. It's like this guy is running the economy from the Monte Carlo casino. In one day, he turns the budgets of millions of Americans upside down and then brags about his flexible approach. He's not flexible, brother. He's indecisive. Don't forget to like this video on YouTube because these facts are free to hear but very expensive to live. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Maybe in the next video, we will talk about how Trump is making the economy even worse. Walmart is now openly telling customers prices are going up because of Trump's tariffs. I've never seen a retail chain so honest. Soon we will have to take out a loan to buy ibuprofen, Even beer went up on Memorial Day. This guy says Americans first in every statement, but he's putting money in our pockets first. Coffee is $3 more expensive, $17, $18. I guess drinking coffee will be a luxury now. On average, goods from China are 51% tariffed. Do you know what this means? There will be no choice in the markets. Everything will be more expensive. Cargo ships have not returned to pre-tariff levels because no one can pass these costs on to the consumer. Trump said he was going to make big deals. All he has done is to impose big bills. It's like he learned his economic plan from a comic book. Stay tuned to this channel because we need to be ready for Trump's next economic fiasco. Share your ideas in the comments, and maybe together we can figure out how to get out of this economic nightmare. The New York Times is right. Trump is increasing the debt, hitting low-income families and hurting his own voters. Of the $4 trillion budget package, $3.8 trillion goes to maintaining the status quo. No real tax cuts. But there are tariffs, which means $3,200 more out of our pockets this year. On top of that, they are cutting Medicaid and food stamps. I guess this is the name of making the poor poorer and protecting the rich. Low-income families are suffering a double blow. More expensive groceries and less government assistance. Even bond markets and the stock market are worried. Trump's Liberation Day plan calls for more tariffs on more than 100 countries. It's as if this man is detonating one economic nuclear bomb after another and doesn't care about the consequences. Unemployment will rise, inflation will continue, but Trump will continue to declare great successes on Twitter. If you like the analysis in this video, don't forget to like it, because seeing the facts is free, but living in the Trump economy is very expensive. Subscribe and ring the bell. The economic nightmare continues. EU leader Ursula von der Leyen has to negotiate with a bloc representing dozens of countries, while Trump acts as if he's negotiating with the neighborhood grocer. As Kelly O'Donnell says, he paints with a broad brush and doesn't care about the details. One day he says he's going to impose tariffs. The next day he says he's postponing them. This indecision does not inspire confidence in the economy. It creates chaos. Americans will now have to carry a calculator when grocery shopping.